Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be making this bad boy. So this is going to be another 3D printed hard bait build. This is another one of my designs. So if you guys want to follow along, all the files to make this are going to be posted in the description below. So you guys are able to download those for free and make this yourselves. Let's start by going over what this bait is and what it's for. This is another striped bass bait. Again, another lure for my favorite species of fish to fish for. I made a batch of these before. I did pretty well on them, although I didn't get out very much this year. Unfortunately, my buddy, on the other hand, who I gave one to, killed it on them all season long. So I'm really happy with the way this works. What this bait's designed to do is swim right below the surface. So it's only a foot or two deep, and it's got a super wide wiggle action. So you're making a ton of movement in the water to draw all the big fish out. It's also got a very large profile. I think this is like 7 inches and 2 or so ounces, over 2 ounces. So it's got a lot of drawing power for big fish. And that's why we have this kind of sharp lip angle. This gives it more of a wider wobble and then keeps it running shallower than the other baits where you see this lip angle is not as sharp and it's coming out a little bit shallower. Now, this bait does have 3 hook hangers on it. When I made it, I just figured, oh yeah, 3 hooks fit on there. And then I didn't really think about fishing for striped bass with 3 treble hooks in there is no fun, and I don't recommend it, especially when there's bluefish around. So you can tune this to your liking. You can get rid of this middle hook altogether. You could put a single hook here. You could just run the 2 trebles, one here and one in the back. I put like a little Siwash hook on the back here, really just because I wanted to try out tying some dressed hooks. And this is kind of a small hook for that. I know the dressing didn't come out so great, but I kind of like the look of that, and that's what we're going to go for today. We're going to do 2 trebles here, and we're going to do a single Siwash in the back that's dressed. So with that being said, the first thing we're going to need is some bodies. So let's print those. All right. I have a few more of these, but I already put some together just to make this video a little easier for me to make, not having to skip back and forth and wait for everything to dry. So we have our 2 halves of the body here, and let's go over some print settings for these. So just like all my other hard baits, you're going to want a wall, line, and bottom count of 7. For infill, I use 35%, and that's worked very well for me with a good strength to weight ratio. Keep in mind, if you're printing this out of a different type of plastic, it may be different for you. I'm using this polycarbonate PETG blend. It's relatively easy to print and it's dirt cheap, so I love it. I'm going to link that in the description below. So what else will you need? You're going to need 4 for each bait, size 8 hook hangers for Worth Lure Company. These are the exact same size I used in my last video on the 4-inch lipless crankbait. So the other thing you're going to need for this bait is something to glue these 2 halves together. So since this is a saltwater, musky, or it's meant to catch big fish, it's a 7-inch bait, you want this thing to be as durable as possible. So I'm going to recommend you use some kind of 2-part epoxy. Super glue might work, but I wouldn't even mess around with that. I really like the DevCon 2-ton when I was doing that, and that'll work really well for gluing these 2 halves together. So if you want some more holding power between the 2 halves, you can definitely rough this up with some sandpaper, and it'll make it stick better. I'm going to do things with some solvent welding. I'll show that off while I do it. But to assemble this with your 2-part epoxy, you want to mix up enough for how many baits you can assemble with the working time it allows. DevCon 2-ton has a 30-minute working time, but anything over 15-20 minutes, it starts to get pretty tough to make these baits. So you want to put your ball bearings in. These just kind of press fit in. It's super simple. These will all act as alignment pins to put these halves together so they line up perfectly. You're going to want to mix up your epoxy, kind of put it all over the edges and everything. You want to get some of these hook eyes on the top part, not the bottom part, obviously. And you want to try to keep it out of the weight chambers, otherwise it won't rattle. I also put some of that epoxy in the hook hanger slots on the other side. And that's because when I design these, they have some pretty loose tolerances just because the Z-axis tolerant on an FDM printer isn't that great. So in order to get it to fit in, it does have a little wiggle room, and I would just fill that in with the extra epoxy you have. And then you would just put these halves together with epoxy on it, and they press fit in nice. As soon as I actually get it lined up, they do. Yep, these will line right up. Grab a paper towel, some rubbing alcohol to get any that drips over the seams, and I would just clamp them together with a bunch of these little bar clamps. That is not how I put my baits together. I am trying to experiment a little bit. I want my baits to be as strong as possible, so I am using this Well-Non number 4. Now, I'm not going to recommend this, number one, because all over the manufacturer website and everything, it says for professional use only. It's not a very nice chemical to work with. And number two, it hasn't really worked too great for me. This is definitely the best bond between the two halves you're ever going to get. It should be just as strong as if these were printed in one piece. It's not a glue. It physically melts both halves of this and welds them together. The only issue I've had with that is the seam is not always watertight. I have like a 50-50 shot of it being watertight or not. And that's because when these come off the printer, they're not perfectly flat. They're a little warped, and then that causes water leaks. You don't need a very big gap to let water in. So I'm going to run a bead of this Well-Non stuff across these, and I'm going to use these very strong and big boy clamps to clamp them together so nothing can fall apart, and hopefully that seam is watertight. Alrighty, so it's been a little while. I had to wait for it to warm up before I could paint these. It's a little chilly outside. I didn't think the paint would stick too well when it's 20 degrees outside, but we're ready to go now. These are all on my custom built lure holders. This is the little base. They use little 1-inch PVC pipe pieces to hold them in. And then these use these little telescopic back scratchers with alligator clips to hold the lure pieces. This is set up so if you're using some kind of clear coat where you need to rotate it, these come out and they go right into the drying motor I built, and then it'll rotate so you don't have to touch them after you're done painting. If you guys use some kind of clear coat, epoxy, you like turning your UV resin clear coated lures, all these parts are available in the description below for free, and I'll link the video to that as well so you can build it yourselves. I still like using these just because they are very nice to hold the bait while you're painting. I am going to build a little holder for these eventually to paint, but I haven't gotten around to that yet. We're actually going to use a different clear coat method for these baits. I'm trying something new out. I want to try dipping them in UV resin rather than brushing it on. I make baits in pretty large batches. I'm actually making this batch and another batch at the same time, so I got 12 baits going, and we're going to try it that way in this video. Anyway, let's get into painting. I got 6 baits here. I'm going to paint them in 3 different color patterns. I'm thinking one's going to be a bunker pattern, medheading, pogey, whatever you call it. The other is going to be a mackerel, and I think I'm going to wing the third one. I'll figure that out when we get there. We're going to hit these all with some white paint. All this is doing is giving us a nice base for our real color coats. So the only thing we got to do next before we go on to actually painting is hit this stuff with a heat gun. So Createx airbrush paint is a heat set based paint. So you just got to give it a little warm air from the heat gun to make it set. Now with that being said, you guys don't have an airbrush and you're on the fence about buying one, you absolutely do not have to get an airbrush. There's plenty of other ways to paint these baits. Really, you can use anything. I would just look up videos on how to paint 3D prints. Anything that'll stick should work. The airbrush is obviously the best method, but if you guys are just starting out and you don't want to dump a bunch of money into an airbrush, you can definitely use something else. Watercolors, rattle can spray paint, and honestly, I've even heard of guys using nail polish. All right, we're going to move on to our next color, which is going to be silver. We're going to paint a silver bottom on 4 of these. The silver is going to work good for the bunker pattern, and it's also going to look good for the mackerel pattern. So when you guys paint, pro tip, just try to do it in stages. That way you don't have to use the same color more than once. Like I know 4 of these baits are going to use silver, so I'm going to paint all 4 at the same time with that color. We're not going nuts with this. I just want to be able to see the reflection in the sunlight. I just want a light coat at the bottom. All right, so next up is going to be our bunker pattern. We're going to start off with some gold and then just do that across the top of the bait. Now another tip with airbrushing that I had to learn the hard way is a lot of times it'll take you a few coats to build up the color you want. Don't try to spray too much on. It won't come out right. It'll be all runny and crappy and it won't look good. Like you can see right now, this gold's kind of way too faint for me. I don't want to put on too heavy of a coat. I'm going to have to do 2 or 3 coats of this. Alrighty, we're going to do our blue now for our mackerel pattern. This looks a lot darker on camera than it does in person, but we'll see how it turns out. This is probably going to take a couple coats as well, just like the gold. For our last color pattern, we are going to paint these blurple. So that's just a purple body with a black top. My all-time favorite nighttime color for striped bass. And once everything dries, I'm actually waiting for my stencils to print now. We are going to do the black color on all of these. So I'm going to paint this purple. It's going to take me a few coats. Our stencil is done printing now. I tried resin printing this. The last time I made these baits, I did it on my regular FDM printer. I'm going to link these files free with these baits as well, but they're not the best. So I'm going to start off with the blurple. We'll do our bunker pattern. We're going to throw our little spots in here. And then finally, we'll hit our mackerel pattern with the stencil we have for the stripes. Next, we're going to finish these baits off with some stick-on eyes, peel this tape off, and get ready for our final coats of clear coat, and we're also going to do a mid coat. So I'm just using glass stick-on eyes. These are the 8mm size. I just find them cheap off of Amazon, and they literally just get stuck on. Sometimes if you find these are falling off, you can use a little dab of super glue to keep them on there. But these 8mm eyes will fit right in. All right, so now we're going to move on to our mid coat. This is something new I'm going to try out. I got this tip from an engineer angling video. I'm going to be using this Minwax polyacrylic water-based cop tote. This is the matte finish. And basically all I'm going to do is I put that in this container. I'm going to dip the baits in here and then put them on this rack. This is a 3D printed drip drying rack I built. So I'm just going to submerge it in there, pull it out, let it drip some back in the container, and then hang it on this rack to dry. All right, these are all dripped and drying off. They're already starting to turn clear. This stuff's this milk color when you dip it, and then it dries clear eventually. So I'm going to let all these baits dry, and I'm going to move directly onto my real clear coat or the top coat. You guys can use whatever you'd like for that. I know you can just look up lure building clear coat. You can go anywhere from just rattle can spray paint clear coat to something more durable. I'm going to use UV resin like I normally do, except I'm going to change it up a bit. I'm going to use the dip method. So basically I'm going to do exactly what I did before, dip it into a container, except rather than just hanging and dry, I have to hang it in a UV light box to cure it. I'm not going to show that part on video just because I have to warm up the resin and I got to do it inside in the dark so it doesn't start to cure outside the chamber. But I will see you guys when everything's all clear coated and then we will finish up these baits. Welcome back. We got some finished baits now. It's been quite a while since I started this project. I actually got to use these baits, well, my last batch of these baits quite a bit last season. And I did catch quite a bit of fish on them. So it works really well for stripers. And I'm sure it would work really good for a lot of other species. The one thing I did notice about these though, is I was originally using a single hook on the rear and it was kind of just getting in the way. So the way I had this bait set up before is there were two of these 1/0 trebles on the front of the bait. And then there was a single hook in the rear. It was a dressed hook. It might have been a little small, but what I noticed is all the fish I caught were hooked on these two hooks and this rear hook only got in the way. The only time it ever hooked into a fish was in the net or whenever I was trying to get in the kayak. So because of that, we're going to skip this middle hook hanger right here and we're just going to run 2 trebles. But when you guys make these for yourselves, you can choose whatever hook setup you'd like. It may affect the action a little bit, but it should still swim pretty much the same, especially on a bait this big. Let's show off the finished versions. We have our bunker pattern, which I think came out really nice. The clear coat I had a couple issues with. I was trying to use the dip method and it didn't come out that great. So I'm going to go back to brushing it on and using the lure turner. This is our mackerel pattern. And this is our blurple. I'd be really interested to see what color patterns you guys come up with. To set this bait up, you guys can use whatever hardware you want. I'm using size 8 split rings. Just if you change up the split rings, make sure you're using stainless steel. Even if you're in freshwater, they're a lot higher quality. And for the hooks, I'm using these 1/0 VCM hooks from Barlow's Tackle. They're super strong. These are also the short shank version. So it doesn't matter so much in this setup, but basically what it does is make the shank shorter so that the hooks can't foul when you cast it. I tied up dress trebles for all these baits. Not so great at that. I'm sure you guys can do a lot better than I did. I'm not sure if that affects how much the fish like these, but it looks really nice when done properly. So this is a final version of our blurple. This is our mackerel color. And finally, this is the bunker pattern. So that's going to be it for this video. Like I said, it took me quite a while to get this one out, but I have been hard at work on a bunch of hard baits. I'm actually switching gears right now. I'm trying to make hard baits on my resin printer now. I'm hoping that opens doors for a lot of the people that got the resin printer for the soft plastics. And it's a little less intimidating for someone who's new to 3D printing to make these baits. So I got 6 or 7 of those baits at all different stages of development right now. I'm just waiting for it to warm up because I can't test anything with all the water being frozen. We also hit 1,000 subscribers since my last video. I want to thank each and every one of you guys for that. Enjoy these baits, go make them yourselves, and go catch some fish. Thank you guys for watching.